Hi theory students. This is the third and last part of our chapter on embellishments. Here we're going to be covering incomplete neighbors, anticipations, and pedal tones or pedal points. First, incomplete neighbors. These are neighbor notes where only one side of the neighbor is moving by step, either by step into the embellishment or by step out of the embellishment. The first one we're going to be discussing is something called an appoggiatura. That's a fancy Italian word, and it means to lean or to push on something. An appoggiatura is a skip or a leap into an accented dissonance, and then it resolves by step, often in the opposite direction. Let me show you. Here, in this example, I'll play this. In this example, the A is approached by leap. It doesn't fit into the G major chord. It resolves down by step, and most important for this one, it's accented. We say incomplete neighbor because this part of it resolves by step, this part of it does not. Then we have another appoggiatura or incomplete neighbor. The B is not part of the D7 chord. We approach that by leap. It's accented compared to its resolution A. And to show you it can work in both directions, when we go back to the G major chord, we skip down to the F sharp. It resolves back to the G. Those are three good examples of appoggiaturas. Traditionally, every accented dissonance that's not prepared by a common tone, the way a suspension is, would be called an appoggiatura. And these would include accented passing tones and accented neighbor tones as well. But whatever you want to call them, accented dissonances will all resolve by step. Let me show you examples of accented neighbor tones or accented passing tones that we may also call appoggiaturas. Here in this example, in the key of G minor, imagine that we have these accented neighbors in the first measure, and then going to accented passing tones. So 5 chord with accented neighbors, 1 chord, and the circled notes, accented neighbors, accented passing tones. We could call each of those appoggiaturas, whether they're called accented neighbors or accented passing tones or appoggiaturas. What's important is that they each resolve by step. The two unaccented incomplete neighbors are called escape tones. The French is échappé, that's a traditional name for it, but escape tone is fine. It's unaccented, it's approached by step, but resolved by skip in the opposite direction. I'll have to show you an example of this because it often embellishes a descending scale. So in this case, in F major, imagine a descending scale before resolving to F. Now imagine Note that we have the escape tone here, there, and there, approached by step, resolved by skip in the opposite direction. Approached by skip, skip down. Approached by step, skip down. And each of those escape tones are unaccented. And as I said, they embellish a descending scale pattern. The last of the incomplete neighbors are the reaching tones. This is not covered in your book, so I'm adding this. It's also unaccented, and we have a skip or a leap into the note, and it resolves by step. Think of this as the opposite formulation from the escape tone, except both of them are unaccented. I'll have to show you an example of this. So here, imagine that we've just got C major all the way through. In this case, we're arpeggiating through the C major chord, but we need 4/8 notes, and we don't want to arrive on C until there. So the reaching tone in this case, we skip or leap to it. It's unaccented. It resolves by step, or in most cases, reaching tones actually resolve by half steps. Here we're going down, and we dip below the G to come back. We dip below the E to come back. And now we add alterations to the F and the D to make them half steps. So to summarize incomplete neighbors, we have the accented incomplete neighbors, the appoggiaturas, and we have the unaccented incomplete neighbors, the escape tones, and the reaching tones. Each one has a different formula for how we skip or leap into them, or how we step and resolve them. Next, we've got the anticipation. The anticipation is unaccented. It's not part of the chord when it arrives, and then it repeats as a chord tone. It's as though the right note in the next chord arrives early. Here's an example. At the end of the example for the escape tones, I wrote an anticipation. Note that we've got a 5 chord, leading tone E over here, dominant C over here, and I'm going to a 1 chord. The 1 chord will have F in the melody. I get to the F early before the 1 chord comes in. I'm anticipating the 1 chord. And you hear the F arrive before the rest of the chord. This is a common technique at cadences, but you could really use this anywhere. Remember that the anticipation is unaccented. It resolves by common tone because it's bringing in the chord tone, but bringing the chord tone in just before the chord itself arrives. And finally, we have the pedal tone or pedal point. This is a note that repeats or sustains while the chords change around it. Even if the pedal tone no longer fits into some of the chords, this often occurs in the bass. The term pedal comes from organ playing, where a bass note can sustain by holding a pedal down. This is not merely a common tone between chords, but this is a repeating tone over several changes. Here's an example. In this example in G, the G is going to stay in the bass while the chord changes over it. This would be a 1 chord up above, a 4 chord, a 5/7, and a 1. But this all happens over the tonic pedal. Pedals tend to be of two kinds: tonic pedals, which could occur at the beginning of a phrase or the end of a phrase, where we typically find tonic expansions, or a dominant pedal, which would typically occur at the cadential dominant point of the phrase. But whichever way it happens, it often happens in the bass, but it doesn't have to be in the bass. In that case, that note keeps repeating on the off beats. And that's also a kind of pedal tone or pedal point. The pedal tone may be consonant or may be dissonant, but it tends to last long enough to be a little bit of each. That's the end of our chapter on embellishments.